So here are 5 free Mac utilities that are so good that if the developers tomorrow said, you know what, we want to start charging for these, it would be completely fair because these are great apps that will be useful for many people. So let's dive in and see what they are and see if any of these might be useful to you. So the first tool that we're going to look at here is called Onyx. Now, Onyx is an app that I've used over the years to run maintenance on Macs, to get them to speed up a little bit, to clear out cache files and logs and things like that, which can bog the system down a little bit. So this is a program that if someone came to me and said, you know what, Michael, my Mac is running a little bit slowly, what can I do to speed it up? Then one of the first things that I'm going to recommend that we run on that Mac is Onyx, because what this app does is it makes available to us in a very nice, easy to use interface several maintenance tasks which will help to speed up the system overall. So for example, we can verify the structure of the file system. Now that's something that you don't need Onyx to do. You can do that with the disk utility that's built into macOS. So you don't need Onyx for many of these things, but the benefit here is it does put those things all in one nice, easy to use interface, which is pretty cool. So I can do something like clear the launch services database or rebuild the Spotlight index. And those are things which can be helpful to just kind of troubleshoot and get things working back more like what they were at the beginning. And we can clear out things like the system and application and internet caches. Those are good to do. Log files and reports. Now, those things are not bad, of course. And those are things which ought to help you in the long run. But as those files grow, as the caches get too large, then it can lead to a performance loss. And it's good to just kind of clear things out that you don't need anyway. So that's something that you can do to help to maintain and clean the system a little bit. There are, of course, other options on here. You can clear your trash, which is good to do occasionally, and any junk items and fonts cache, things like that, which can, again, not a bad thing, but as the cache grows, then you want to clear that cache a little bit, and it's probably better to do that. So now secondly, there are some options in here that you can run. So maintenance scripts, those are things that macOS will do automatically, so you don't actually have to do that. So this is something that is done by macOS for you. You don't have to do this. But if you want to be kind of proactive and do this on your own, then you can do that here, which is pretty cool. Now, there are also some other options here, including clearing your DNS cache and browser cache. Now, this will depend on which browser you're using, of course, but there are also log messages. So if there are logs for your applications that are kind of getting large, then you can run this and hopefully regain a little bit of space too, which is nice. Now, there are some other utilities here within Onyx, which you may or may not find useful. There is a dedicated option here for running that file system check. Now, that's something that does run as part of the maintenance script run here. So you don't actually have to do that by itself. And you can, of course, do that with the disk utility. So you don't need to do it here. But if you wanted to, you can, and it's there available for you. You can look at your APFS snapshots if that's something that you have turned on and it's of interest to you. There is a manual page for Unix commands if you want to see how to use these, something that's not really interesting to me personally, but if that's interesting to you, then it's there for you, which is kind of cool. There's some shortcuts here to some other Mac utilities and troubleshooters, which are possibly helpful to you depending on what you want to do. Now, one thing that I do want to say about this before we get too much further into Onyx. Onyx is a very powerful application and you can do a lot with it. There are some things that you can change with it in the parameter section here that might lead to some unexpected behavior. So if you're not comfortable kind of tweaking the system and just kind of playing around with your preferences, then you might want to stay away from this section. But if you aren't afraid to hit that restore defaults button and kind of go back to the way it is from factory, just after tinkering, then check it out. So there's some cool things here. So for example, in this section, I can change what the default screen capture file type would be. So by default, I have it set to PNG, which is the macOS default. Well, what if I wanted it to be a JPEG? Well, I can change it to JPEG, or I can change it to GIF or BMP or PDF. Those are all cool things which you can do. You can even change what the name on the front is. So I can say, well, actually, like what I did up here, I said, hi YouTube, and then I changed it to a JPEG, just as a silly example. And that's something that you can do if you want. So you can call it, screenshot, or you can call it, picture, whatever you like, and then you can choose which file format is best for you and your use case. Now, there are some times when you might prefer to have a JPEG over like a PNG, or you might want a TIFF, depending on your workload and what it is you are doing, unless you want to save that screenshot out and then save it into whatever format you want, which you can do, of course. Now, you can see here that one downside of using the JPEG over the PNG, of course, is that the JPEG does not have that transparency in the background, so that's a consideration. But the PNG does, which is probably why it's default. And it does look nicer if you're embedding that in a web page or something like that. So kind of cool. But that's a cool option for you. Now you can also see that there are some other options here with Finder, and you can change some things here. You know, these are things that I personally don't care about, but you can, you know, adjust to your heart's content if you like. Some menu options, dock options. Now, one cool thing about this is you'll see that there are actually 3 different ways to minimize windows into the dock. So by default, it's using the Genie effect, which is this thing right here, which is kind of cool. But if you wanted to, you can change it to one of these others and just see what it looks like and see maybe you would prefer one of those others. Maybe you're bored with the Genie effect and you want to try something else. Yeah, go for it. Now, one thing that I do like about Onyx is you can change the background image on the login screen. So that's something that strangely macOS doesn't really have a really good GUI way to do. So you can do that by putting a picture into a system folder, which is hidden. But you can do that. But this makes it easy to do it from a nice interface here without having to go into system files and all that fun stuff, which you really don't want to be doing that anyway if you're not really savvy. So one thing to be aware of. And of course, there are some other application and miscellaneous issues there. So pretty cool. So that's Onyx, and Onyx is a really cool program. I really like it. It's free. Now, one thing to be aware of before you go into Onyx and download this, make sure that you are getting the version for your computer, because there is a different version of Onyx for you depending on the version of macOS you have. So for example, here's macOS Ventura. You're going to want to get Onyx version 4.3.7 or whatever the current version is. If you are still using Monterey, then definitely make sure that you get Onyx 4.2.7, because each of these versions is designed for that specific version of macOS. So if you download the wrong version, it may not work, or it might even cause some issues if it does actually launch. So make sure that you're getting the version for your version of macOS, especially if you're going to be doing any of those parameter tweaks, because those things do change from version to version. So make sure that you're getting the right version, okay? So that's Onyx, pretty cool. Now our next app is called NightOwl. So NightOwl is an app that lives up in the Finder bar of your Mac, and it makes it very easy to switch between the light mode and dark mode of macOS very quickly and very easy, and I love it for that. Now, I'm someone that likes to switch between those two modes, you know, on a whim, and I don't want to have to go into system preferences or system settings every time, because I think it's kind of annoying to go, you know, all the way up here, and then, you know, if I'm not already in that section, then I've got to go down to appearance and try to find the right section. And then I can switch here, but that's just, you know, it's too many steps. I'm lazy. I want to do it all in one step. Now that's where NightOwl comes in. So this is an app that lives up here in the Finder bar. So I can just right click on this little guy right here, and it will switch for me right there. Very quick, very easy, very cool. This is an app that honestly, if the program maker were to start charging for this, I probably would pay for it. I think this is one that ought to be part of macOS. I mean, this is a functionality that I would love to see Apple include with the next version of macOS. I don't think they will. I know that on iOS or iPadOS, there is an option to add a toggle to the control center for dark mode, but I don't think there is one of those yet in macOS. So please, Apple, that would be great. But for now, there's this little app which is free, and it lives up here, and you can schedule the dark mode to go, you know, from sunrise and sunset, or you can do it based on time. You can exempt certain apps from the dark mode if you would prefer. There are also keyboard shortcuts if you want to use one of the built-in keyboard shortcut options. Now, one thing I do wish that they would do for us is give us more options here. Unfortunately, there are only 3 different option sets, so you can't really define your own keyboard shortcuts, which would be great. You know, depending on the apps that you use, these shortcuts might all conflict with something else. So I would like to see more options there, but you know what, really, this is great for what it is, which is free, and free is a great price. So pretty cool. That's NightOwl. I like it a lot. Check it out. Our next tool is called the Unarchiver, which is really, it's an alternative to or a replacement for the built-in archive utility from Apple in macOS. Now, the archive utility is pretty good. It's not bad. It will understand most of the file formats that you're likely to find, like zip and things like that. Of course, it will work just fine with the archive utility. But there are some file formats that even the archive utility doesn't understand. And for that, you're going to want something like this, which is a free download, and it does understand more file formats. So for example, it will even let you work with Amiga, you know, LZX and DCS, and, you know, ALZip and, you know, .deb files. So these are some formats that you might possibly need to work on at some point. Now, very likely, depending on what you do, you'll never ever need to open one of these other more obscure archive types, but if you ever did, then this is a great option, and it's a free utility. So to use this, all you've got to do is drag the .app to your applications directory, and then you can right click on an archive and say open with the Unarchiver. And it works pretty quickly. And there we go. So I just extracted that .app file from that archive, and it works beautifully. Now on the extraction tab here, there are a few different options. So by default, it will extract archives to the same folder. But if you wanted to ask you where to archive or to extract to, then you can do that here. You can say ask for destination folder, and then every time you go to unarchive something, it's going to say, well, where do you want to unarchive it to? Which is a pretty cool option if you want more granular control like that. The next utility here is called ImageOptim, and this is one that is very helpful for people who need to compress images without losing too much quality. So if you've ever done anything with web content, maybe you're a blogger or a web developer, you know how important it is to make sure that your images are optimized, because if the images are not optimized, then what can happen is the images will cause the whole website to load more slowly, which can cause you to lose page rank, or your visitors get disinterested, and that's just not really a good option. So that's where this tool comes in, and it will actually look at images and decide, well, how can we save space? So for example, here's one that I've put here on my desktop called Write and Get Paid, and this is one that I created for a YouTube short, and this is just a cover for a YouTube short. And what it's doing here is it's looking at the image itself, trying to mathematically decide how can we reduce the file size without losing too much quality. So here we go. What it just did was it just looked at this image, and you can see what the original was about 754 kilobytes. Now that's not terrible. I mean, as far as images go, there are worse ones out there. So this one's in the range of acceptable. I would like it to be a little bit smaller. So that's why I did this, and this knocked it down to 610. So 610 versus 754, that is a significant difference in size. Now that's something that will that by itself make the world of difference when loading on a web page? You know, probably not, but that does add up over time. So you want your images to be optimized, and this is a really cool free tool to do that locally on your Mac without having to use any of the web services out there or paying for any out there. So Apple tells us to uninstall apps from our Mac by dragging them from the applications folder into the trash. But that's not really the most efficient way to do it, and when you do that, you can actually leave some data behind that you would really rather get removed, especially if you're trying to save space or use as much space as possible on your drive, or if you're trying to uninstall and reinstall the program due to a problem with it. So I want to show you a couple differences here between dragging it to the trash versus using a cool tool called AppCleaner. And AppCleaner is one of my favorite tools of all time. So here's what happens. If I drag this tool called Disk Inventory X into the trash, you can see what happens here is it does find the .app file, which is good, and that's the bulk of the data. That is the most important part, you know, the biggest thing that I want to get rid of if I'm trying to save space. But I know for a fact that that is not all of the data there. There's more to it than that. So I'm going to put it back over here in my applications folder, and then I'm going to launch this program called AppCleaner. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to drag the Disk Inventory X application into that instead of the trash. And you can see that it does find two more things. So not only that .app file, but also this file here, and then also a plist file, which is a preference file. So if I'm trying to uninstall the program because maybe I've got a corrupted preference file, well, if I'm just getting rid of that .app file and then re-adding it to my applications folder, it might not actually fix the problem. But if I remove everything and then reinstall the application, that very likely will solve the problem. So AppCleaner is a really cool tool, and it's a lot more thorough than just dragging your app to the trash. So good to know. And there also is an option here. If you don't want to have a Finder window open and dragging your apps into AppCleaner, there is an option here if you just launch AppCleaner in the top right to see a list of all the applications that you have installed. So let's say for a fact that, or let's just say for example, that I want to uninstall Canva, and it will just do a quick scan and show me all of the items that are associated with Canva, and I can say if I want to remove them or not. Or, you know, there's Cinebench, which gets installed with the Adobe Creative Cloud, or, you know, Firefox. Now Firefox only found that one thing, JetFox. So this is a really cool tool, and it's free, and it's a lot more thorough, especially if you're trying to keep your system as clean and optimized as possible. So AppCleaner is one that I would really recommend, even if you don't like any of the other apps in this list. This is a really cool tool for making sure that when you do uninstall an application, you're actually getting all of it and not just part of it. So I think we can agree that these are all some very cool Mac utilities. These are all free, and free is a great price, as I keep saying. But if the developer said tomorrow, you know what, we're going to make these a paid offering tomorrow, in the next version is going to be a paid app, then honestly, it would be perfectly worth it in my opinion. I think that these are all worth every penny if they were to charge for them. But fortunately for us, they're not. I mean, they're all free, and free is a great price. You know, AppCleaner is something that I think I wish Apple would include with macOS, or the functionality to completely remove all of those preference files and everything else. That would be great. This is something that Windows users have known as an issue for a long time as well. So I can't really fault Apple too much for that, really. But you know, that NightOwl is a really cool tool for switching between light mode and dark mode, and there's some other cool things in there too. So hey, if you like this video and you found it useful or interesting or entertaining at least a little bit, then please hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.